Come and enjoy a straightforward, humorous, and enlightened hour on quantum physics to metaphysics on the show that wants you to ask questions. It's time for Ask Patti, live with your host, Patti Conklin.
Hi, folks. It's Patti Conklin coming to you from beautiful Stone Mountain, Georgia. Thank you so much for joining this show tonight, Ask Patti Live. And sorry to say, Dr. Fernessa Hall is on the road again. She landed late in Boston, so she's not going to be able to join us tonight, but I've got an excellent co-host for tonight's show. Just want to kind of lay out the month of June. Fernessa and I talked about some subject matter for the month of June, and we really decided to talk about addiction. We still come back to personal responsibility as we always do. But we really felt it was important to discuss addictions and what they are, how they happen, what we can do to recognize them, what we can do to move beyond them. So, there's a lot of different avenues that we'd like to discuss. And tonight we're going to be talking about drug and alcohol abuse, addiction. And then 2 weeks from now, and I'm moving to a calendar here, that'll be June 18th, we're going to be discussing sex addiction. So tonight I have Dr. Pamela Thompson on the phone with me, and we'll be discussing drug and alcohol, and I just couldn't ask for a better co-host. And then we'll move into next week where Fernessa and I will continue the conversation. And then on the 18th, we'll have Dr. Thompson back, and the three of us will be discussing sex addiction. So, Dr. Thompson, welcome. Thank you so much for being on the show with me tonight.
Well, thank you. I'm so glad to be a part of it.
It's just exciting to have you here. When Fernessa and I were sitting down looking at the month of June and addiction, she said, I know the perfect woman to be a part of this, and I want to call her and see if she'll come into the program with us for this month. Now, tell us a little bit about you.
Okay, well, sure. I am a psychologist. I'm a clinical psychologist by training, and I have my own private practice where I see quite a few people who have had some addictions in the past that they are recovering from in various stages. And I also work at a women's prison 2 days a week where, again, I work with an addicted population and see in an up-close and personal way the effects of addiction on the lives of those who have spent their fortunes and lost their families trying to maintain their addiction. And I also provide life coaching services and team building services for individuals and organizations who want to advance their dreams and goals and who feel stuck in lost focus or procrastination. So
right.
I'm across the gamut. I provide a lot of different services to different populations. I also provide some clinical services for a group home that caters to the needs of children who are in the custody of defects because of dysfunctional family situations.
Right. What took you into psychology? What took you into life coaching? Just why that subject matter?
Well, I had a pretty interesting divorce back in 1993. My prior career was in public relations. I worked in public relations for 10 years. My undergraduate degree is in journalism. And had a really interesting marriage, which led to an interesting divorce. And I became really fascinated with couples and how it is that some people seem to make it work and others do not. And I became so preoccupied with this that I was always in the self-help section reading everything I could on the subject matter. And so eventually I realized that it had become that much of a passion to me that I needed to pursue it educationally. So 6.5 years later, when I received my doctorate, not realizing, of course, that it would take that long for me to have this change of career, I emerged having to work in areas that weren't necessarily my passion, such as the women's prison that I spoke of. It just so happens that there was an opportunity there. You have to do a postdoc fellowship in order to get licensed, and there was an opportunity that emerged for me at this women's prison. And I had done some prison work before, as many psychologists have over the course of my training. And before I knew it, there I was at the prison, and it turned out to be a really, really personally rewarding experience to me, and very eye-opening, and I will count that as one of the best things I could have done with my life at the end of my life.
Wow.
It's such an opportunity to serve people who are radically different from yourself, and yet in some ways so very similar.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so then the life coaching piece just sort of evolved because I realized that my personal style, or my clinical style, rather, is much more of a coaching style than, say, a Freudian style anyway.
Yeah.
And so I was always interested in connecting my clients with other resources and other opportunities and other learning experiences, and just sort of coaching them into not just being healed, but being the best that they could possibly be.
Right, right. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's just such a beautiful, beautiful help to society of just, like you said, not only just helping people heal, but to really help them understand their own worth and their value to society and what they can give.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, as I was saying earlier, Vanessa and I started discussing about addictions because, it's one of those areas that I don't think a lot of people talk about, and it's not something that especially the sex addiction that we move into in a couple of weeks, that people necessarily are comfortable. But as Gary pointed out last week, and I think that was really true when he joined me for a little bit, that people are becoming much more open about discussing different things in their life. And I think it's a real healing portion of life, of when you can talk about life. I've always got this theory that if I can't talk about it in lecture, then I probably haven't fully processed it. That once I processed it, it's just part of the history that makes me.
Right.
And it just needs to be looked at that way. And as we were moving into this this field of looking at addiction for the month, I just, Vanessa and I have had this talk before of just, I come from a prescription addiction and alcohol addictive family. And when I was a teenager, I remember, kids wanting me to come to parties, and I would just say, if there's drugs there, I'm not going to come. If you want me to show up to the party, then you need to not use drugs while I'm there, and after I go, feel free. And because it wasn't that I had a moral objection, I had an absolute fear that if I started something like that, because of the addictive nature of my family, that I would never stop. And that was enough of a fear to get me to stop. So years ago, I was lecturing in Amsterdam, and I was getting ready to go, and my kids sat down and teased me, and they started laughing, and they said, Amsterdam's wasted on you. I mean, you've never smoked pot, you're 50 years old, and, it's just wasted. People like you shouldn't be allowed in the country. I just started laughing. But, it's one of those things that stuck. And I'm very grateful for that, because had it not, I could see a totally different path of life for me. So, when I think about teenagers getting started with different drugs or different alcohol, it's just scary. Is there any real rhyme or reason as to why people begin an addictive pattern?
Well, yes, I think that really each of us finds our own way of sort of managing the early disappointment and emotional injury that, inevitably we all suffer And for some people, it might be addiction, and for some, it might be excessive shopping, which also is an addiction. Or for some people, it may be that they gravitate towards dysfunctional relationships as a way of sort of recreating what they're experiencing at home. I mean, we all just sort of find different ways of coping and managing, some of them healthy ways and some of them very unhealthy ways.
Right.
And
but
so, go ahead, I'm sorry.
It's really just a process of not coping, isn't it?
It is a process of not coping. I think that in the initial stages is a coping mechanism, though it's a maladaptive coping mechanism. In other words, what I mean to say is that you do what you know how to do at the time. In fact, Maya Angelou has a wonderful quote that I use a lot. She says, I did what I knew how to do at the time. When I knew better, I did better. So it's sort of born out of ignorance of what to do. I don't know what to do, so I'll do this, and this sort of gets me through to the next day. It's a short-term strategy that unfortunately has long-term consequences. So
right.
Yes, in the sense of what you're saying, yes, you're really not coping, but it is that Band-Aid that you think at least temporarily stops the bleeding.
And that's what it is yes. A Band-Aid.
It is a Band-Aid.
Yeah, the issues don't go away. I remember as a teenager, my sister would get so frustrated with me, and she'd say, you know what, you can fall into the biggest barrel of crap, and you still come out smelling like a rose.
Yeah.
And I just looked at her, and I said, that's because the barrel was never crap. It was an adventure. And I couldn't wait. I couldn't wait to figure out how to deal with whatever situation I was in. It excited me of how do I in the big picture fix this. So, some of it I think comes along with personality and what we're really looking for at life. And sometimes, it is that Band-Aid. It becomes the coping mechanism, and then over time it becomes the not coping at all. And one of my friends and I have been having a discussion about addiction, and I just said, in my book, there's no such thing as a partial addict.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I wonder how you feel about that. Are there such things as partial addicts? I mean, we always hear if you're an alcoholic that, you have to abstain from alcoholism or from, alcohol at all. And same with drugs. Can people who are true addicts be partial?
I would say absolutely not.
Yeah, okay. We're on the same page with that.
Yeah, for sure. I would say, although people fool themselves into thinking they can do that.
Yeah.
And, they can maybe experiment with drinking if their drug of choice is crack, but of course, it's all sort of connected to the same principle of hiding behind the mask of drugs, of a substance that you think temporarily is going to give you some relief, and unfortunately, as I said, paints this picture of long-term ugliness in your life. Plus, it keeps you from being fully engaged with other people. There's no way that you can really be engaged in life and really fully present for life if you are addicted or even partially addicted, as you say.
Right.
You certainly amazingly have people who can get up and go to work, look like they're functioning Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, and then just sort of crash and burn when they come home in the evening and on the weekends.
Right.
And in a sense, that's almost sort of a longer punishment, if you will, because it prolongs the process of reaching that ultimate bottom one day.
Yeah.
And you miss a whole lot of life in the meantime.
Right. Right, because you're really not seeing life.
Right, I mean, you're not seeing life, and it takes a lot of energy to keep that big secret, from everybody else. It takes a lot of energy to hide it and to cover up and create lies around where you were and why you didn't make it and why you were in jail for the weekend.
Right.
And those things takes a lot of energy, and that's energy you could be devoting somewhere else, to your children, to your wife, to service, to mankind. So you can't be fully engaged in life and be, even partially addicted, as you say. I use that word loosely, that phrase loosely.
Right, right. And I mean, it really goes into all sorts of different, we can be addicts in so many different ways, whether it's, drug and alcohol, whether it's food addiction,
Absolutely.
and, food addicts who binge, who will starve themselves and then binge and just, move back and forth between the reelings. And for me, it really comes down to life is about balance.
Mm-hmm.
And that self-analysis. It's always a wonderful thing, as far as I'm concerned, of having close friends. And Fernessa and I tease a lot with each other because, if I'm doing something that she feels is just a little out of sync, she sits me down and says, hey, you're making a decision that I think you ought to think about. She won't say it's wrong, but she'll say, I think you need to sit down and think about this a little bit more clearly. And I'll do the same with her. So I think friends are a great barometer of what decisions are you making in life. And if those friends or loved ones who are closest to you are saying, hey, heads up, there's something wrong here, it's time to pay attention. Because they're the ones who are going to know whether or not you're acting out or whether or not you're truly being real with yourself.
Oh, yeah, I agree, 5,000%. And I don't know where I would be in life if I didn't have my two closest friends who, are doing, for me, just what you described with Vanessa, just holding you accountable to a higher standard of living.
Right.
And it's unfortunate when an addict is in that place of social isolation, and alcohol or crack is the best friend,
right.
It is the lover, it is the mistress, that you are cut off from being able to grow from the experiences of others.
Right.
And when you don't have quality friendships in your life, that is people who are forward thinking and progressive in their learning experiences and enthusiastic about life and being more, and when you find yourself sort of at the top of the food chain in your circle of friends, you don't have anybody in your life to challenge you to do better and to look at your decisions more carefully. And that's really one of the most unfortunate things, I think, about the life of an addict, is that it is a life of social isolation.
And it really becomes a life of isolation.
Yeah, definitely a life, and a pitiful life of isolation. They're not happy being isolated, so, okay, I'll go get high to cover up my unhappiness about that or to manage my unhappiness about that, which, of course, exacerbates the situation, and you're more isolated and more depressed, and so it goes.
Right.
So it goes the vicious cycle, and I think it fools you at some point. It lies to you at some point and makes you believe that this is the way your life will always be.
Right.
So why would you change? You can't change, so it says to you. And it lies, and it makes you forget that there was once upon a time a simpler, quieter, gentler, kinder life for you. You've forgotten about what that felt like.
Well, because it's just not stopping the substance. It's really beginning to understand how to cope, how to interact, how to become part of society. And as I was saying earlier, there's all sorts of different types of addiction. And, some of the addictive personality, and I think I would classify this as addictive. I tend to be an isolationist. I like being alone. And when I'm on stage or when I'm lecturing somewhere in the world, that's great. I'm on. I can take my questions and answers, and I engage, and I love it. But when I get home, then I almost become a hermit. And Fernessa and my other friends here on the lake have really lovingly pushed me in the last 2 years, I think it's fair to say, to stop being so isolatory and to come out, because if I were to say I have an addiction, it would be that. It would be I love being alone. I don't sit in my house and go, oh God, I'm alone again. I mean, there's never that. But it's getting out and socializing and being part of the community. And I think that, I kind of look at that as a little bit of an addictive behavior because that's my comfort zone.
Yeah, and I think, I think there's a difference between, being really socially isolated from people and just being somebody who maybe needs a little bit more solitude than your average person. And if you're the kind of person who actually needs to be, to have more downtime, to be a little more introverted, to be quieter and more, more tranquil in your environment, then it's refreshing and it's replenishing to go to that place, And then so when you go out for somebody like yourself who's engaged with a lot of people, who's out and serving and giving so much in a big way like that,
right.
I imagine you need to be refueled in a way like that. That's not necessarily unhealthy. But
right.
I think, the point that you're making is that there are so many different kinds of addiction, and we can, sort of miss seeing them because we're thinking about the bomb on Skid Row.
Right, exactly.
And not realizing that, because I know when I was in my 20s, I had addiction to tennis and really to exercise in general. So it was something that was all consuming to me. I would arrange my whole life around my tennis schedule and my practice schedule and, my whatever schedule at the gym or what have you. And on the surface, of course, this looks like, wow, this is such a healthy thing to do, and it was great, and how could that be bad for you? But it was in the sense that it always kept me in this sort of rush, hurried mode.
Exactly.
I couldn't enjoy a church service because my tennis match started at 1 o'clock, so I'd have to leave, right out the door, and I didn't have time for fellowship with people at church because I've got tennis. I've got tennis. So,
and I wonder if that really makes us a society that is more easily addicted because people really do rush. I mean, and they keep busy. And Vanessa and I have talked about this. A lot of people in the service industries, of the healing industries, whether you're a physician, whether you're an alternative practitioner, whether you're a psychologist, whatever the case may be. Boy, if you don't set boundaries for yourself, you can get so involved with all of your patients' lives that you forget your own.
Oh, yeah.
And some people use that as the coping mechanism. To not deal with life is to go ahead and be of service with somebody else and focus on their life. So, I think that, again, it comes back into self-awareness and where we're going with that. So we're already at 26 after the hour or somewhere in there. So we're going to go to break and come back on the other side. And I'd like to keep going with this of how do we recognize it? And if we have a loved one or if somebody's listening to the show tonight who feels like they have an addiction and don't know what to do, feel free to give us a call tonight. You've got the perfect forum all month, 877-230-3062, and feel free to give a call and ask questions. But right now we're going to take a 2-minute break or 1-minute break, whatever it is, and we'll see you on the other side. Hi, folks. Thank you so much. This is Patti Conklin, and joining me tonight is Dr. Pamela Thompson. And Vanessa is now hopefully settled in Boston and relaxing a little bit, but she's very sorry she missed the show tonight, but she will be back next week, and we will continue this whole month of June discussing addictions because there's so many different addictions. There's so many different things to look at, and I really believe in the premise of figuring out that you've got a problem is 80% of the work. And, the rest can be relatively smooth if you dedicate yourself to being healthy. But you need to understand whether or not you are. And that really comes into to personal awareness. But Vanessa had set up a beautiful, beautiful guest for us tonight, and Dr. Pamela Thompson. And let's see, we've got some contact information for you, if I can find my appropriate paperwork. But why don't you tell us about where people can look at you? Can they go to the web?
Yes, they can go to my website at www.novum.group, and that's N as in never, O, V as in victory, E, M as in money, group.com. You can email me at drthompson@novumgroup.com, or you can call me at 404-644-0710. Wonderful.
And I want to give you Vanessa's contact information, and that's mobile-medicine.net on the web. And you can look up Vanessa's information or my information at pattyconklin.com. And, just feel free to contact us. Dr. Thompson is in the Atlanta area. Now, do you do any phone work with people, or are you pretty much in person?
No, coaching is actually done preferably by telephone, so I could have a client and have had a client in Canada, or they can be in Atlanta. So that anybody with a telephone can access the coaching services. Now, therapy is more of a one-on-one, face-to-face kind of experience. Right. Yeah.
But life coaching, you're right, can be anywhere. Now, what are some of the more, well, maybe this is a silly question. Are there specific types of addictions that are more problematic than others? Are they all across the board the same?
That's a very good question. I would have to say, ultimately, I mean, just boil everything down to the most basic understanding. I would have to say that one addiction can be swapped out for another addiction, and the damage to your life may look different. It may be able to keep a job and keep a marriage together and that kind of thing with one type of addiction, for instance, like with my exercise addiction that I was talking about earlier. But there's something else, big missing in your life. So I would have to say, in my opinion, I think really from a spiritual perspective, there is not one addiction that's greater or more sinful, if you will, than another addiction. It's just that the consequences of those addictions will look very differently.
Right.
I think probably the be-all, end-all is that anytime you have something at the top of your life that becomes an idol to you, that consumes an inordinate amount of your time, your energy, your devotion, your thought, life, and all of that, that you're on a slippery slope. And it really doesn't matter what that thing is at the top of your hierarchy. But if it's really the kind of thing that is anything other than God, in my opinion, at the top of that hierarchy, then you're on a slippery slope.
Right. Well, and we had discussed a little bit earlier when we were talking before the show of just, I tend to have a belief with just the different addictions that I've worked with in the last 12 years as a medical intuitive, but, throughout my lifetime in doing various work, I've always been a nonprofit service organization, so, it's always been a time of giving, but one of the things I've come to the conclusion of is an addict always stays an addict. And we do, people can switch addictions so that they're more productive addictions. But you made a really good statement that, when you're removing something, when you're removing the addiction itself, you need to fill back up with something. You need to fill back up with a power that's greater than yourself. And one of the things that, I think is important is people really doing that check and balance within themselves. I am not a perfectionist, but I understand that if I start to get agitated about something, really don't ever get angry, but if I get agitated about something, then it's time for me to sit back and reflect about why I'm why I'm agitated and what part of me needs to be looked at, not changing the situation, what part of my personality needs to change to be accepting of the situation, or is it just not a road I'm going to walk? And we talked about the need to have a belief, and I think you and I both kind of concurred that it doesn't matter really what road you want to talk, or walk, as long as you're believing in something, whether you call it God, whether you call it universe, whether you call it creator. I tend to make my connection and call Father. I think that it's just really important for those down times, because we're all going to have them.
Right.
Whether we're in an addictive personality or not, we're all going to have times when we need to sit down and say, okay, I need to embrace something, a belief that's going to get me through this situation without reaching for something that's going to be unhealthy.
Yes.
Can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Yes, we did have such an interesting conversation about that before the show, and we were in agreement that it's not enough to just get clean. That it's just not enough to just be clean, detox, and okay, I no longer pollute my body, or I no longer participate actively in whatever it is, gambling or sex addiction or what have you. Because when you're empty, when you've emptied your body and your behaviors of this addictive nature, there's no guarantee against it not coming back.
Right.
And usually, if it comes back more so with a vengeance. It comes back more so more intense than it was before,
right,
or more destructive than it was before, and your life can spiral out of control rapidly. I think where we may have disagreed a little bit is that I as I was saying to Patty earlier in this audience, I have had a faith-based practice these past several years where my particular specialty is integrating my clinical knowledge and expertise with a biblical worldview. And so I have catered significantly to the Christian community, and I certainly serve people of all faiths, and I'm comfortable and happy to do that. I do, however, believe it makes a difference in terms of what particular walk you do choose, and but I think it's a healthy start to start at a place where, okay, I relinquish my life to a force that is bigger than myself.
Right.
And for some people, that may start off with something like the love of my family. It may just start off with that. Like, I just love these precious children so much. My desire to keep this unit intact is bigger than me. And I submit and surrender to that. And for other people, as they evolve, it ends up being a real submission and surrender to God. And to me, of course, my philosophy is God as revealed through Christ. But you have more experience probably than I have with people surrendering to all types of different higher powers, and you've seen results with that. Is that correct?
Yeah, it really is. And I think, as you said, it's really about taking that first step and having a belief. Mm-hmm. I know that people throughout the years have said to me, how do you have such the strong belief that you have? And just for those of you who may be listening for the first time, I've talked about this a little bit, but I had what I considered to be my first visitation when I was 7 years old. And I had never been to church. I had never seen a Bible. I had never seen any of it. Mm-hmm. All I was in a very dysfunctional family. Mm-hmm. And I just remember this beautiful room, light coming into the room with a serenity more profound than I've ever experienced. and hearing a voice say three things to me. 38 to 42 will be your greatest growth year. 42 to 62 will be your greatest contribution to humanity. But the purpose of your walk is to teach people to become insubstantial without transitioning. And even though I was, precocious as a 7-year-old, I didn't understand what that meant until I was overseeing women's literacy programs in 30 countries throughout Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And I've been very blessed in the fact that, I have a high school education, and I've never had a mentor, and I've never had training, but that position put me in a place, because of my sight, to be able to observe cultures and how we interacted and how we stored and how we, began creating disease within our bodies. And for me, that voice was pivotal in different areas of my life throughout my lifetime. And so I always listen for that voice, and I don't care how bizarre it sounds. 12 years ago, I was director of Canine Companions for Independence, and I oversaw the Southeast region, 12 states, and had a visitation again.
Wow.
And Father said, it's time for you to begin walking the path I asked you to walk as a child. I want you to take your family, move to Hartwell, Georgia, and begin walking that path. And within 5 minutes, I called my boss in Santa Rosa, California, and I said, it's March 23rd, and I'm resigning effective July 15th. And he said, where are you going? And I said, Hartwell, Georgia. And he said, where's that? And I said, I don't have a clue. I need to go home and look at the map. But it was a tiny town, and it was wonderful for my children, too. They were in high school then, to finish up the high school years, because my work began immediately. I mean, there was no marketing phase. It just began overnight.
Wow.
And I think what's so important in all of that is for people to understand that there is always a message inside of you, always that message. But you need to truly believe and have the faith that, it's, I don't believe that there's a wrong road that we're walking. We can make it a harder road or an easier road, but we make the choice. And according to what we listen to. So, I do think it's critical that people begin taking those baby steps towards trusting, because no matter which way you start out, you're going to begin developing that belief within yourself and listening to that voice of, being of service, of the checks and balances. Am I being able to go to bed at night and look in the mirror and know that I lived my life today in integrity and honesty? And I think that that's crucial. And I think that if you can't do that, then look at the different areas of your life that are stopping you. What addictions, if any, are really roadblocking you, and be that brutal honest with yourself. And because we can really convince ourselves of anything. And I think we need to convince ourselves to, like I said, be in that check and balance. When you see someone with an addiction, and I know you do quite frequently, what's kind of one of the first baby steps you ask them to take? Or is there a baby step?
Yeah, I mean, it probably sounds so cliche-ish by now, because I think it's so commonplace that, first of all, you have to admit that you have a problem.
Right.
This would be the big step right here, to acknowledge that there is something really out of kilter about my life. Because one thing that I stated to my clients and that I assess for is that if it's not a problem for you, it's not a problem for me.
Right.
And so people have to feel a certain amount of discomfort around the choices that they have made. They have to feel some downright pain about the choices that they've made, because we gravitate toward things that bring us pleasure. And when something stops bringing us pleasure and becomes downright painful, we generally are then, and only then, ready to work on it.
Right.
So I definitely look for insights, which is, the ability to really step outside of yourself and look at your life and say, wow, okay, I have a problem. I do that. I hurt people. I escape. I hide. I mask. I bury. This is what I do. So I look for, as you started off the show talking about earlier, I look for a sense of personal accountability.
Yeah.
That I and nobody else am responsible for the choices I've made and the places that I have taken my life. Now, that having been said, I think it's very important to really honor people where they are and to really celebrate the fact that they are still alive, they're still breathing. Yes, they made some bad choices, and yes, those choices had some grave consequences, but we really want to celebrate somebody's ability to survive whatever it was that was so empty and so horrific to them that turned them toward an escape through drugs.
Exactly. And it also seems like it's really important in context with that for loved ones, for family members, not to become emotionally invested in someone else's addiction.
Yes.
That you don't feel guilt because you're not able to get them through it or help them. People really do need to hit that place, whether it's rock bottom, whatever, where they want to make the change for themselves, not for somebody else.
Yes.
Being guilted into change isn't typically going to last. Because you're not changing for yourself. And we're going to go to break again. We're down to the last 15 minutes. I'm loving this. And when we come back, let's talk about some of the different tools that we can use to help change addictive behavior. So we'll see you on the other side, folks, in about a minute. Folks, thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is Patti Conklin, and my guest tonight is Dr. Pamela Thompson, who's here in Atlanta. And you can contact her through www.novum, NOVEM.com.
NovumGroup.com.
Pardon?
Novum Group.
Novum Group, that's right. I just want to say Novum. No, Novum Group.
Yeah.
And would you give us your telephone number again?
Sure. It's 404-644-0710.
Wonderful. And this is a colleague, a friend. I think you guys belong to maybe a couple of groups together of Fernessa Hall. And Fernessa was sad to not be able to join us tonight, but she will be here with bells on next week. And Fernessa and I are going to continue this conversation, and then the following week, Dr. Thompson's going to be back with us so we can talk more in depth about sex addiction. Because, folks, I know that, as life gets more stressful, as we struggle more to pay the bills, and, price of gas is going up, and more people are struggling to keep their homes, sometimes it's easier to non-cope, and just not function the way we need to. And I just really want to remind people, what that SHIT stands for, and it's a spiritual human in transition. Because the reality is, if we're laying around the pool drinking margaritas and all of our bills are paid, we're not searching our souls as to how to change and grow. And so sometimes we get these hiccups in life that force us to cope. But I just want to encourage you that life is an incredible adventure. And if you feel like you're hitting a brick wall in your life, change your perception of the brick wall and seek help. There's a lot of incredibly competent people out there who can help you understand what's taking place and taking some of those steps to change your life. And, remember what fear is. I mean, we can use the acronym of false evidence appearing real, but we also can use it as forgetting every available resource. And that resource is what you have inside of you. And, we're all just incredible human beings and very strong. Tap into that inner strength because you've got it. You've got it. You've got it sitting right there. And with some help of some outside professional help, spiritually, physically, emotionally, you can get to a space where you truly can look at life and look at the beauty and wonder of life as it is. So, Dr. Thompson, what's some of the steps that people can, is it appropriate to call their local outreach office, social services offices to get help?
Yes. Well, fortunately, we live in the land of Google now, where you could Google Narcotics Anonymous, or Alcoholics Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, whatever, and find your nearest chapter and meet with these individuals. I think the peer support process is invaluable. We talked earlier about the importance of not being socially isolated entirely,
right,
where you can't get help and you can't grow from others' experiences. And so you can start there, and certainly any local social service agency or local county government agency or local church community could point you in the direction of the help and the community help that are in your area.
Because there really is help out there. I mean, I think sometimes people get stuck in, I can't get help, I don't have money for it. There are a lot of free programs across the country. I know we've got people listening across, the United States and in other countries. So, really make available of the resources because you do need that assistance, that loving support to help you get through the hardest time.
Yes, absolutely. And I would also say that I think you and I talked about this earlier too, that, when we get in a dark place in life, people have a tendency to beat themselves up with, I should be better, or I should be able to keep this on my own, or should, and you just should yourself into depression and isolation. And I think really just starting with the idea of accepting who you are, good, bad, and ugly, warts and all.
Surrender is really huge, isn't it?
It is. Surrender is so huge.
It's so huge. And, for those of you who are listening who may be in that dark space, I want to remind you of something. Duality has to exist. You don't understand what light is without dark. You don't understand what good is without bad. You can't understand how good you can be until you understand how bad you can be. So use that as a gauge. If you're feeling like you're in a really dark space, understand that the flip side of that, you are incredibly awesome. And, it's how we understand one aspect to another.
Yes.
So, you'll always swing out. You can always go from the darkness to the light, and at times we go from the lightness to the dark. And when I feel like life is just, getting too heavy, if I've got a heavy travel schedule or a heavy lecture schedule, or if I've had a heavy client level, of just a lot of issues, I balance out. I may take 2 weeks and just sit on my dock and stare at my belly button, and just re-energize yourself. So, make use of those resources. If somebody's out there questioning, we've only got a few minutes left, but if somebody's out there questioning whether or not they have an addiction, and say, well, it may not, I don't know that I'm that bad. Is there any indicator that they can really take and sit with tonight and say, yeah, maybe I need to look at this more closely? Whether or not they're functional in life or whether or not they've got healthy relationships. I mean, are those some of the key factors that they would look at?
Yes, certainly the lack of quality relationships, the inability to thrive in a career or a job despite the intellectual capacity to do so. Usually addictions come with some kind of financial destruction or ruin, chaos. They generally go hand in hand because it generally takes money to support whatever your addiction is.
Right.
An overwhelming sense of emptiness, and loneliness, despite the fact that you could be in a crowded room. You could be so busy and appear to have such a full life, but you know that at the end of the day, you feel overwhelmingly empty and sad and lonely. You realize that this thing that has become the source of your addiction is the number one thing you think about throughout the course of the day, and there are other things that you need to be doing and might even like to be doing, but feel that you can't. You're compulsive about supporting your addiction, and you realize it, in ways that you may not be ready to admit, but, you realize something is way off balance about my life. And those are just some of the indicators. Certainly a sense of spiritual disconnection, you don't feel alive and engaged with the beauty that surrounds you, both the living beauty of a child and your family and other things that are not living, but just as beautiful and to be appreciated that you have no appreciation for. You can't connect with it at any level.
I just so appreciate your insight tonight, and I'm really looking forward to you being back. We're in the last minute, so I just want to let you know if you'd like to get in touch with Dr. Pamela Thompson. It doesn't matter where in the world you are. Go to the web and look up novemgroup.com, Novem group.com, and contact Dr. Thompson and reach out. There's a lot of beautiful people waiting out there to assist. And if you have a medical issue, certainly Dr. Vanessa Hall at mobile-medicine.net. And if you want to talk to me, then go to pattyconklin.com. So, Dr. Thompson, again, thank you so much for being with me tonight, and we'll talk to you in a couple of more weeks when we talk about sex addiction.
Yes, thank you.
Just really looking forward, and thank you so much for your insight.
Oh, thank you. It was my pleasure, Pat.
Thank you, folks, for listening. We'll be back next week, Dr. Vanessa Hall and I, and we will continue this discussion about addiction and some of the physical components of how that manifests and some of the spiritual components also. So good night, folks. See you next week.